Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start with a tweet from Tracy Alloway. So who had mutated bat snake flu as their top market risk for 2020? I certainly didn't. Though in my article on the 13th of January, I was saying 2020 opens with a bang. And certainly I had not factored in a mutated bat snake flu. By the way, I'm receiving numerous reports interbank lending in Europe is drying up, commercial credit squeezed, collateral calls, credit lines reduced or terminated. That's from Hal's Rethink. The Marketeer has an article about the geopolitical tension bull, and certainly I touched on this in the article 2020 opens with a bang. I said, the uncertainty I have outlined, gold looks well underpinned and might even have a banner year, notwithstanding the fact that a lot of chartists I follow are quite bearish. Gold is trying to build a floor around the 2019 high at 1555. In the short term, however, the need for a deeper correction may be needed to breathe fresh life into the market. That's Ole S. Hansen. We're currently trading at 1553.50. Look at this chart from Northman Trader, the S&P versus the Baltic Dry Index. For many years, the Baltic Dry Index was seen as a good indicator of economic activity. It tends to be ignored these days. Home Thought's temporal bandwidth is the width of your present, your now. And that's, of course, Don DeLillo. The moment is not properly an atom of time, but an atom of eternity, Kierkegaard wrote in contemplating the paradoxical nature of time, half a century before Einstein forever changed our understanding of it. As relativity saturated the cultural atmosphere, Virginia Woolf was tussling and taffying with time's confounding elasticity, the psychology of which scientists have since dissected. We are beings of time and in time, something Jorge Luis Borges spoke to beautifully in his classic 1946 meditation on time. Time is the substance I am made of. Time is a river which sweeps me along, but I am the river. It is a tiger which destroys me, but I am the tiger. It is a fire which consumes me, but I am the fire. Of one thing I'm sure is that time is not as linear as we experience it. 23rd of December, I was talking about how the world is a complex and non-linear, interdependent world where feedback loops can start spinning at dizzying speed. Everest remains the source of drama aplenty. Look at this picture taken last year by Nim's Day, last May, of a human traffic jam at the peak. That's from Godfrey Mambo, and it's such a great photograph, isn't it? Political reflections. This is from V.T. Chakarova. Under the law of polarity, there cannot be multipolarity in international relations. There will be bipolar geopolitical bloc formation. President Macron gets testy with Israeli police in the Church of St. Anne, Old City of Jerusalem. And that reminded me of Jacques Chirac, who got similarly testy in 1996 in Jerusalem as well. Trump admits he is comfortable with the status of impeachment because White House is withholding evidence. Honestly, we have all the material. They don't have the material, he said. As always, he says the quiet part out loud. While bushfires are affecting some parts of Australia, most destinations remain safe and continue to welcome visitors, like this slice of paradise in Queensland, and it looks like a slice of paradise. But the scenes from Australia have been very apocalyptic. Okay, let's get to the coronavirus. City in lockdown, China bans trains and planes from leaving Wuhan, seeking to seal off its 11 million inhabitants to contain the virus outbreak. Here's a short video. Roads in Wuhan on lockdown and blocked by police as the city is being quarantined. Latest count as of first thing this morning. According to the National Health Commission, mainland China, 571 cases, Hong Kong 1, Macau 1, Taiwan 1, US 1, Japan 1, Thailand 3, South Korea 1, global total 580 and 17 dead. There's a lot of skepticism that this number is massively undercounted. On super spreaders, experts says so far there is no proof that this has occurred. And then I came across a tweet from Henry Makow. Bill Gates kept telling us a pandemic was coming. In October 2019, he ran a simulation of a coronavirus pandemic. Just 3 months later, the real coronavirus pandemic begins. And according to the article to which Henry is referring, Gates thinks a coming disease could kill 30 million people within 6 months and says we should prepare for it as we do for war. If there's one thing that we know from history, it's that a deadly new disease will arise and spread around the globe. There's one area, though, where the world isn't making much progress, Bill Gates said, and that's pandemic preparedness. The likelihood that such a disease will appear continues to rise. New pathogens emerge all the time as the world population increases and humanity encroaches on wild environments. It's becoming easier and easier for individual people or small groups to create weaponized diseases that could spread like wildfire around the globe. And in our interconnected world, people are always hopping on planes, crossing from cities on one continent to those on another in a matter of hours. Gates presented a simulation by the Institute for Disease Modeling that found a new flu like the one that killed 50 million people in the 1918 pandemic would now most likely kill 30 million within 6 months. And the disease that next takes us by surprise is likely to be one we see for the first time at the start of an outbreak, like what happened recently with SARS and MERS viruses. According to Gates, a small non-state actor could build an even deadlier form of smallpox in a lab. If he were to tell the world's governments that weapons could kill 30 million people were under construction right now, there'd be a sense of urgency about preparing for the threat, he said. In the case of biological threats, that sense of urgency is lacking. The world needs to prepare for pandemics in the same serious way it prepares for war. This was from October 2019. Wuhan is officially shut down. This is from Bai Meng Fu. I wrote about the Ebola virus in 2014, and I think the points I was making are very valid. I said it's about its escape velocity. which is the Paul Virilio term. And the reason I said that is because viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, i.e. they can go from 1 to 1,000 to 1,000,000 very, very quickly. It is a numbers game. The more cases you have, the more likely there are going to be mutations that could change the virus in a significant way. That was David Sanders, a professor of biological sciences. The more it persists, the more likely we're going to be thrown a curve. 10 times worse than SARS, this is a prominent Chinese virologist, Yi Guan, says the best time for controlling the spread of the coronavirus is past, and the number of infections could be 10 times that of SARS in 2003. 23rd of December, when I was thinking about the world, I called it a complex, non-linear, interdependent world where feedback loops can start spinning at dizzying speed. The source of the coronavirus that broke out in the Chinese city of Wuhan may be snake to human transmission, according to the abstract of an article published in Wiley's Journal of Medical Virology. So it's a highly, it's impossible to model what could happen. The market had a big sell-off yesterday. Crude oil got hammered. Equity markets came off. US forces block 2 Russian military convoys in northeastern Syria as tensions increase, reports the Arab source. Tommy Thornton published a big chart of asset volatility with the S&P as well. That took me back to an article I wrote in September 2016 when I was quoting Hotel California, mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. Let's move on to currency markets. Euro dollar 110.85, dollar index 97.565, Japanese yen 109.59. I mean, that could move quite dramatically. Swiss franc 0.9687, the pound 131.43. That's been on a bit of a run of late. Australian dollar 0.6872, India rupee 71.2293, but that could strengthen on the basis of a lower oil price. South Korean won 1168.52, Brazilian real 418.29, Egyptian pound 15.794, South African rand 14.364. This is a 5-day chart of the dollar index from FX Pip Titan. I still think once we have the knee-jerk move complete, the dollar is going to move back towards 94.50. We're at 97.565. Euro dollar 110.85. I think it's well supported, though I see increasingly bearish calls. Tesla absolutely flying. More than 150% gain in the last 100 days. That took me back to the parabola. It is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola. Trump asked about Elon Musk seems to imply that some unnamed American invented the wheel. This is from TBP Invictus. And I must say I did listen to Adam Schiff, who I think made a very compelling case, notwithstanding not having all the evidentiary details to hand. Coming back to Tesla, as I said in October, I have to commend Elon Musk for teaching the world about what a short squeeze really looks and feels like. JP Morgan on Netflix narrative shifts to share gains versus linear TV in 2020. This is via the market ear. They remain positive on Netflix and price target is $410 a share, and the reasons are there on rich wrap-ups. As I said in September, Netflix is not a US business. The US business is mature, more competition. It's a global business. And the majority of analysts are in the US. And in my opinion, these same analysts have an international blind spot. Commodity markets, crude had an extraordinary day to the downside. Last trading below $56. We've bounced a few times from this sort of level, so it'll be interesting to watch. It's down more than 11% since January the 6th. Fabio Schwartzman, the former chief executive of mining giant Vale, and 15 other people have been charged with homicide for a dam disaster in Brazil last year that killed more than 250 people. This is Lebanon's new government. Photograph was taken by AFP Beirut, and they're trying to clamp down on the street because, as Paul Virilio pronounced in his book Speed and Politics, it is the revolutionary contingent which attains its ideal form, not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor machine of attack. In other words, a producer of speed. Let's move on to Sub-Saharan Africa. Crisis groups. Alan Boswell interviewed Mutiga. This is episode 8. It's covering East Africa in 2020, the Horn of Africa, and some very interesting perspectives. It's a 26-minute podcast. At more than 500%, Zimbabwe's incube sees inflation stabilizing. Year-on-year inflation remains high, but that's expected. That's what happens when you liberalize a currency, he said at Davos. The statistics agency suspended publishing year-on-year inflation data after June, when monthly inflation peaked at 39.3%. Monthly price growth has cooled. It was still at 16.6% in December. We said that month-on-month inflation is going to be stabilizing and going to be dropping. That's what has been happening, Cube said. We believe that we're on our way to dealing with inflation. It will take time, but we're headed there. 21st of January last year, a whole year ago, I said the point I'm seeking to make is that there is a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. Water being pumped to millions of residents in Zimbabwe's capital city has come from reservoirs contaminated by dangerous toxins, says The Guardian. Tom Mipinganjira, the CEO for FDH Bank, was arrested in Blantyre, Malawi, following a complaint on the 8th of December by the judges who are expected to pronounce their ruling on last year's elections at any time. Malawi Anti-Corruption Bureau has arrested the CEO of the country's third largest bank for allegedly offering bribes to judges hearing a case on the country's disputed elections. Egypt's Al-Sisi considers withdrawing support from Libya's Haftar. Information was corroborated by an Egyptian diplomatic source. The communication between Cairo and the Libyan commander has considerably deteriorated. Algerian source also reported that the Egyptian government has decided to transfer the Haftar case to military intelligence, and that President Sisi had cancelled a recently scheduled meeting with the Libyan field marshal. A breakdown might have prompted Haftar, who's backed by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, to seek support elsewhere, including in Russia and Greece. I touched on the Maghreb a decade later, and Libya and the intrusion of middle powers. And of course, on one side we have Haftar, a dual Libyan-American citizen, commander of the Libyan National Army, bankrolled and supported by the UAE, Egypt, France and Greece. And on the other side, we have the Government of National Accord, led by Prime Minister Siraj and supported by Turkey and Qatar. And I said in that article, Libya is clearly an example of geopolitical cliff edge risks, and that the Horn of Africa exhibits entirely similar characteristics. In fact, from the Maghreb to the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, we are witnessing a surge in asymmetric warfare and the intrusion of middle powers. Fitch Solutions 2019 household income estimates South Africa is home to nearly 2.78 million households with annual disposable income of $15,000 or more. Egypt has only 0.15 million, Nigeria 0.64 million, which is very interesting. African equities are trading at lower dollar valuations than global peers, yet growing faster with higher dividend yields and higher US dollar ROE, says H. Wolfson of Imara. We believe that Africa discount is due to a reality perception gap. This creates an attractive entry point. South African all shares up 1.46% year to date. Dollar rand is at 14.355. Egyptian pound, which has been a standout this year, is at 15.7884. EGX 30 is down 1.5% this year. Nigerian all share is up 9.75% this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange is down 1.02% this year. UK-Kenya Strategic Partnership 2020 to 2025 is a press release from the Foreign Office in the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Johnson and President Kenyatta met at Downing Street on 21st January, where they agreed a new strategic partnership and issued a joint statement. From 2020 to 2025, we will work together across 5 pillars: mutual prosperity, security and stability, sustainable development, climate change, and people to people, reflecting the key challenges and opportunities of our time. New York Times has released an article which has got a lot of conversation going. Hiding in the grass, fear and confusion as fighters overran a US airfield. The brazen Shabab assault at Manda Bay, Kenya, a sleepy seaside base near the Somali border on January 5, left 3 Americans dead, raising complex questions about the military's mission in Africa. Armed with rifles and explosives, about a dozen Shabab fighters destroyed an American surveillance plane as it was taking off and ignited an hours-long gunfight earlier this month on a sprawling military base in Kenya that houses United States troops. Surprised by the attack, American commandos took around an hour to respond. Many of the local Kenyan forces assigned to defend the base hid in the grass, while other American troops and support staff were corralled into tents with little protection to wait out the battle. It would require hours to evacuate one of the wounded to a military hospital in Djibouti, roughly 1,500 miles away. The storming of an airfield used by the American military so alarmed the Pentagon that it immediately sent about 100 troops from the 101 Airborne Division to establish security at the base. The assault represented a serious security lapse, given how much of a target the base was and its location near the border with Somalia, said Murithi Mutiga, the International Crisis Group's Horn of Africa project director. The deaths of the 3 Americans, 1 Army soldier and 2 Pentagon contractors marked the largest number of United States military-related fatalities in Africa since 4 soldiers were killed in an ambush in Niger in October 2017. The Kenya attack underscores the American military's limits on the continent, where a lack of intelligence, along with Manda Bay's reputation as a quiet and unchallenged locale, allowed a lethal attack. A Pentagon proposal to reduce the American military footprint in Africa drew sharp criticism last week from senior lawmakers of both parties, including Senator Lindsey Graham, a South Carolina Republican who is a close advisor to President Trump. Early on the morning of Jan 5, Dustin Harrison and Bruce Triplett, two experienced pilots and contractors with L3 Technologies, a Pentagon contractor that helps conduct surveillance and reconnaissance missions around the world, were taxiing their Beechcraft King Air 350 on Manda Bay's tarmac. They throttled down their engines, according to one person familiar with the attack. The two men reported that they saw animals darting across the runway. They were wrong. The animals were in fact Shabab fighters who had infiltrated the base's outer perimeter, a poorly defended fence line, before heading to the base's airstrip. As the twin-propeller Beechcraft, loaded with sensors and video equipment for surveillance, began to taxi, the Shabab fighters fired a rocket-propelled grenade into the plane, killing Mr. Harrison and Mr. Triplett. Shabab fighters were not done. In the ensuing chaos, they made quick work of a significant portion of the American fleet of aircraft, a mix of 6 surveillance aircraft and medical evacuation helicopters on the ground at the time. Manda Bay is at the southern edge of an archipelago of American outposts used in the fight against the Al-Shabaab in East Africa. Since the team was at Camp Simba, an American enclave roughly a mile from the airfield, the insurgents had ample time to disperse. And then talking about the Kenyan forces which protect the airfield, those forces are typically not as capable as US forces and are easier for terrorist groups to infiltrate. Without doubt, they had some inside help. The performance of the Kenyan security forces during and after the battle frustrated American officials. At one point, the Kenyans announced that they had captured 6 of the attackers, but they all turned out to be bystanders and were released. There are about 200 American soldiers, airmen, sailors and marines, as well as about 100 Pentagon civilian employees and contractors in Kenya, helping train and assist local forces. A large majority of them work at Manda Bay, according to military officials. But there were not enough Americans to stand perimeter security on the airfield. The Shabab have typically avoided American outposts and the technological superiority of the American military, instead attacking more exposed Kenyan and Somali troops in the hinterlands. On November 5, Shabab released a 52-minute video narrated by the group's leader, Abu Ubaida, in which he called for attacks against Americans wherever they are, saying the American public is a legitimate target. The Pentagon carried out 63 drone strikes in Somalia last year. This is a huge escalation. Almost all against Shabab militants, with a few against a branch of the Islamic State. That compares with 47 strikes against the Shabab in 2018. Since March 2017, the Shabab have launched close to 900 attacks on civilians and hundreds more against US, Somali and Kenyan troops, the Sufan Center in New York said in an analysis. It remains unclear how the Shabab fighters made their way onto the Manda Bay base, whether by surprise or a vehicle packed with explosives. According to one American official, the group likely had patiently watched the base and had selected their attack based on the Americans' well-established patterns. Investigators are looking at the possibility the attackers had help from Kenyan staff on the base, said one person briefed on the matter. This was designed for propaganda to show they could strike American bases, said Matt Bryden, director of Seyhan Research, a Nairobi think tank. Their capability to strike in East Africa is growing. On the 13th of January, I called it a mind-bending, Jedi-level intrusion, an asymmetric warfare coup de grace. And I said then the Manda Bay attack is the first Al-Shabaab is carried out on a US military installation inside Kenya. And I said the US Africa Command has sent its crack East Africa response force to secure the airfield and augment security. This is in fact a big deal. 20th of January, I said, in fact, from the Maghreb to the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, we're witnessing a surge in asymmetric warfare. The central bank governor, Dr. Njoroge, was interviewed on Bloomberg. He said Kenya should consider partnerships with the private sector to help fund government spending because it doesn't have much room to increase debt. East Africa's economy's debt is at about 62% of GDP. We don't have much headroom for additional debt financing. The issue for us is how to energize the economy so we can increase the economy's repayment capacity, both in terms of government revenues or foreign exchange earnings, if indeed the payments are external, he said. The efficiency of the projects to deliver returns is critical. This is what I've spoken about before, the return on investment, which in many cases is negative. Director of Public Debt Management Haroon, should we report parastatal debts that are not guaranteed, what is called contingent liabilities, because the parastatal has borrowed on the strength of its balance sheet, should it be part of the public debt? Well, of course it should. And then have a look at Mohamed Welli's reference to tweets from 2014 about pension liabilities. The Nairobi All Share is down 0.66% year to date. The NSE 20 is down 0.26% year to date. Thank you for stopping by.